Good. Perfect. Yeah, that's great. So, hi everybody. My name is Monique. I actually, as Brazilian, I'm not so formal as Europeans. So, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody's here, and I guess we should go straight for the presentations and the discussions. So, what we thought about was to make first all the presentations. You have 10 to 12 minutes to present each, and then I will make some questions, which I already sent you by email before, so you could get better prepared and everything can be easier. And so Oscar also has some questions, and then we can open to everybody makes the questions they want. This is only a kind to make things a little more, I would say, organized, just some like, but yeah, okay, don't worry. We are here. There's a space to talk, a space to discuss, and I guess we will have a very nice. For me, it would be quite evening. For Rio de Janeiro, would be a good afternoon, and for Germany and Russia, it would be also quite evening. Yeah? Okay, yeah. So it's great. It's a great summer evening. Yeah. Let's see. So the first one would be Aziz, and the second one Tatiana, if she can come in. If not, we can let her speak when she comes. But okay. And after Tatiana would be Guillermo, and then Gustavo, and to finish to close the panel would be Oscar. Yeah. So is this. So thanks a lot again. And Aziz, the space is all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys one more time for organizing this webinar. It's exciting. This is first time of me actually speaking. I was always a listener on the other end. So please don't judge very harshly. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. So I wouldn't be able to see you guys, but if anything is unclear, I'll be relying on the sound. So just speak up, right? Okay. Right, do you guys see the slide?
Yes.
Yes. Perfect. So as you can see from the title, what I will attempt to do is to have a look at minority recognition mechanisms in three post-Soviet countries, being Kazakhstan, Lithuania, and Russia. And so first of all, analyze if there is any mechanism in these countries. And then second, try to see if there are some kind of special rights following these mechanisms and what kind of implementation there is for minorities. And official recognition, I try to define as a sort of a confirmation of minority status, which happens by state. So this is the state who confirms minority status via some established procedure. And why is it crucial for me? Because I see this, the recognition as one of the ways for a state to identify the right holders. So which groups, which communities the minority status and minority specific rights will apply to. And this usually, the recognition usually happens via established set of criteria. For example, in Poland or in Germany, the recognition mechanism is spelled out in the legislation. So to be officially recognized, minorities have to differ from majority by religion, culture, and so on, and live on the territory of the country at least for 100 years and be citizens. So you can see there are some rules you need to comply with in order for state to recognize you as minority. And as you will see from the rest of the presentation, actually in these three countries, there's no official recognition mechanism. But what there is what I call indirect recognition. So there are alternative from my point of view mechanisms that indicate states' action towards a specific minority community, and which is based on this community's self-identification. And this happens from my point of view via several instruments. First is in international commitments of the state. For example, the Framework Convention for Protection of National Minorities, which Lithuania and Russia have adopted. And if usually in the preamble, in the first report, states identify to which specific minorities the FCNM will apply to. So they sort of recognize this is the minorities and we accept them as minorities and these norms will apply to them. And also there are some official lists of minorities. This is a case mostly for Russia. And there are some state programs that single out specific groups. This is mostly about Roma, which has, most of the countries have Roma-specific strategies and programs and projects. So you see they recognize Roma as a separate group. And last is the membership of minorities in different kind of bodies. And these bodies are usually set up by state. So let's start with Russia, which doesn't define minorities in its legislation. However, in the first FCNM report, Russia singles out two groups of minorities. First being the indigenous population, which they call established nation or nations living in Russia for extensive period of time. Both of these established nation and extensive period of time can leave some space for arbitrary decision, but this is not the point. And the second one is ethnic groups of recent origins. So they live shorter than indigenous people, and their mother ethnicities live outside of Russia. So the communities that mostly have kin states, which obviously are outside of Russia. But there's also another definition which actually is in the law on the indigenous populations of Russia, and which are defined as people who live on the territories of traditional settlement. They try to preserve their lifestyle, but they should not be more than 50,000 people. So the question here is what happens to the status of a numerically small indigenous population if the population once exceeds 50,000 people? Do they still are they still considered as indigenous people, or they become a minority, national minority? This is a bit unclear. And this law has also establishes the right of the government to run the list of numerically small people. And currently this list in Russia includes 47 communities, ranging from Nenets being the biggest to around 40,000 to the smallest communities, which count maybe 100 people. So you see there's a list via which recognition also happens, mostly indirectly. And then there is, in all of the Russian reports on ECNM, there are specific mentions of Roma and Crimean Tatars. Crimea being, despite the decision of the Ministers' Council of Europe, Russia still reports on Crimean Tatars. There's also federal structure of Russia, which sort of implies the autonomy via which recognition happens. So each titular nation has its own republic or territory, and after which the state entity is called. For example, Republic of Bashkortostan, Bashkirs being the title nation, or the Jewish Autonomous Republic, and there is the Assembly of People of Russia, which includes around 170 members. But however, its role is still unclear. And when it comes to the rights and implementation, the basic rights and freedoms and freedom of discrimination is guaranteed in the Constitution. There's also provisions for cultural and national autonomy, and also for the republics to establish their own constitution and the state language within the territory of their republic. And indigenous people have a special set of legislation. They have special rights regarding access to natural resources. However, it's being challenged by the extractive industry and the business interests, as well as their culture and language is endangered by the increasing role of Russian culture and language. Also, the Russian people, the Russian nation, recently is becoming the core of the nation building, and the recent constitutional amendments also is an example of that. The last point here is the right for free self-identification for some communities has been violated in a way that they have been assigned a role of a subgroup within a bigger group. So some communities just become subgroups of Russians, for example. However, they consider themselves to be a separate nation. And then we go to Lithuania, which also does not provide a definition for national minority. However, what Lithuania has stated, which I find very interesting in its first report on FCNM implementation, is that all ethnic and linguistic minorities are considered national minorities. So the government states that it is not them who defines the minority status, but the communities themselves, and they accept it. And the draft law on national minorities states that minorities are those who choose to belong to ethnic group. So there's a free self-identification and choice, but this should be in line with national origins of their parents. So the free self-identification is limited to the parents' origins. And when it comes to specific mentioning of some groups, the 9 groups you see on the screen usually feature in all the FCNM reports. My assumption is that these are the biggest and also the oldest communities living in Lithuania. Particularly Polish and Russian communities have a bit of a more spotlight, but these are the 2 biggest communities in the country after Lithuanian. There's also the Council of National Communities, which members of which are elected by the minorities themselves, and based on the size, they can have several seats. But what was surprising for me to find out that there is quite an articulated procedure for recognition of religious communities. So Lithuanian legislation defines traditional, non-traditional communities, religious communities. Traditional, there are 9. They are in the law, and non-traditional communities can apply to become a traditional via state recognition. And recognition is also defined here as a state providing support for the communities. So this I found interesting. And when it comes to rights, as was the case in Russia, minorities as well as other citizens have their basic rights guaranteed regardless of any kind of origin. Sadly, the Lithuanian law on minorities, which was one of the oldest in the country, was repealed in 2010. And since then, there was no specialized legal act on minorities adopted. But what Lithuania did, unlike other Baltic countries, is after the Soviet Union collapse, they granted a procedure of obtaining citizenship for all its population, regardless of their ethnic origin. So around 90% of minorities have applied to become Lithuanian citizens. There's also a state policy to combat the xenophobia, racism, and anti-Semitism. However, its effectiveness is still doubtful because in 2015, around 23 minority representatives confessed that they think nationality-based discrimination is still a thing which they face. And another issue is the increasing role of Lithuanian. Although the language rights are provided and guaranteed, so minorities have the right to use their language in different kind of instances, including their names and signs. This becomes a challenge to implement, and one of the biggest problems the minorities report on. And the last country we will look at is Kazakhstan in Central Asia, where I originally come from. Again, there's no definition for national minority, and unlike Lithuania and Russia, Kazakhstan has adopted the convention of has not adopted the framework convention, but adopted the Convention on National Minorities of the CIS countries, so meaning former Soviet countries, where minorities are defined as citizens of a state party who are different from the majority by their origin. But the most important point here is that this convention, unlike FCNM, does not have a monitoring process. So it's practically impossible to see how it's being implemented in Kazakhstan or other countries that adopted it. And when it comes to indirect recognition, what I mainly looked at is the Assembly of People of Kazakhstan, which includes minority communities of the country, and is headed by its country's former president, Nazarbayev, which somehow indicates quite a high role of the body. The body also has a constitutional status. It can elect 9 MPs out of its members to the country's parliament, and the president can either approve or reject the candidates, or he can bypass any election and introduce new members himself. So it can be quite arbitrary, but it's the nature of some Central Asian countries. And the law on the assembly of this body claims that its main task is to build the civic identity of Kazakhstan. However, it underlines the consolidating role of the Kazakh people. And you can see there's a trend still in all this minority-related legislation to somehow underline and stress the role of majority populations in some of the post-Soviet countries. And they usually refer to the historical role of unifying people or consolidating role. The lingua doesn't really change. And when it comes to rights and implementation, the Constitution protects from discrimination based on origins, but it also provides people with the freedom of choice whether to mention their origins or not. And the language law is interesting here because it says it's every citizen's duty to know Kazakh, the state language, but Russian has the special status, which is comes from the Constitution. Russian is supposed to be used on the same level as Kazakh when it comes to governmental bodies and official communication. It is also taught along with Kazakh and English and one foreign language in the schools, as well as minority languages. And minority languages can be taught in school if there is a need expressed by communities, and also if there is enough population. However, it is unclear what is enough. And some non-Kazakh speakers still find it difficult to approach governmental bodies and communicate with them in languages, in not Kazakh languages. Also, there is a freedom of religion guaranteed, but there are some reports that talk about persecution of some religious communities and convictions, and this is mostly those who are considered non-traditional for Kazakhstan. Right, and for the conclusion, as you can see, despite the lack of official recognition procedures, there is still some mechanisms that can be considered as alternatives in direct recognition. And based on my first assumption or impression, they somehow provide a little bit better access to minority rights because they relate to the minority communities and they are followed by specific legislation. And this indirect recognition usually happens via memberships with specific bodies, the reporting, some programs, and so on. However, it still can be of arbitrary character because they are still not formalized, and state does not have a legal and moral obligation to follow up and ensure some consistency. And as the advisory committee continuously reports, states the minorities still face some challenges, be it language, persecution, and not enough resources, and so on. That's why I think introduction of official recognition should be one of the tools, or should be one of the aims for these countries in order to formalize the state and minority relations, and also that for minorities to have some channels to demand minority-related rights. And this procedure should not become a filter for minority communities, so that state decides who is minority and who is not, and limits the scope. But it should be based mostly on free self-identification, and minorities should be involved in development of such mechanisms because it relates to that. Thank you very much.
Okay, it seems. Okay, Monique.
Monica, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, here am I again. So thanks a lot. It was really amazing and interesting. Actually, now I have more questions for you. It's okay. And so I will straight go to the next one. That should be Guillermo, because I guess Tatiana is not ready, yeah? Oscar was talking to Tatiana.
Yeah, I think it's not ready.
Okay, so I will give now the time for Guillermo, yeah? Mm-hmm. And so we go straight like this, and then after, if Tatiana can come. So, Guillermo, space is all yours. Go. And Guillermo, I guess we cannot hear you. I don't know if you are already talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now yes.
Okay,
Go
perfect.
ahead.
Sorry, my fault. Now, I'm going to break away from the empirical presentation that Aziz has provided us in terms of the mechanisms of recognizing minorities in formal Soviet states. I'm going to focus more on the theoretical debates that have been carried out in the literature regarding the analysis or the consideration of nationalism and the nation as instruments of modern legitimizing communities in modernity. So, when one reads the news or watches the news on TV, we can find that everybody that speaks somehow has its own opinion on the nation or what he or she understands nationalism to be. Right. To shed some light on this kind of mixture of opinions, at the end of the day, they are opinions. To shed light on this, we can focus on the existing literature that we have in order, or the literature that discusses nationalism and the nation. Now, if we take a look at this literature, which is in terms of the dimension of the literature, is very vast. You can say that there are as many approaches to nationalism and the nation as you can find authors, coming from different backgrounds and academic perspectives, but at the end of the day, many different approaches. Now, it's true that if in the political arena you have a lack of clarity, when one turns to the actual literature that addresses the same phenomena, one can also find a lack of clarity. Not so much a lack of clarity, but an immense and vast list or a pool of theories that one can focus on to explain nationalism and the nation. So the paper that I'm presenting today and that I'm going to discuss right now tries to organize the different theories and approaches that the literature has towards nationalism and the nation into different paradigms, and at the same time order those paradigms into sets of established and delimited set of approaches towards nationalism and the nation. So the first set of paradigms are called by the literature classic paradigms. Right. The background of these paradigms, one can find them just after the end of the Second World War. Now, the devastation caused by the conflict meant that we needed to find, or we needed to understand how the nation was the basis for the conflict between 1939 and 45, but obviously the political consequences were deep enrooted after 45 and were present before 39, okay? But this is the starting point for the classic paradigms of nationalism. Now, these classic paradigms are or can be grouped into four, okay? Those four are primordialism, modernism, perennialism, and the newest, or at least the one that closed the classic paradigms approach, was ethnosymbolism, right? Although you see there that primordialism comes in the at the beginning of the list, this is not actually completely correct to assume this, because primordialism, what the authors that addressed or approached nationalism and the nation through this paradigm, the only thing that they did was actually incorporate the doctrine that many nationalists had, but to the academia, in the sense that they incorporated nationalist points of view through academia, right? The basic point of those authors that addressed nationalism and the nation through a primordialist lens thought that the nation was a timeless, quasi-organic entity that could be tracked back basically to this start of history, right? So humans were naturally divided into nations, and nationalism was the feeling of belonging to that quasi-organic entity. Now, this was heavily criticized by modernism, okay, and by the social theory inaugurated by Durkheim and so on. Now, attacking primordialism in the sense that those modernists or the authors that approached nationalism and the nation through modernism thought that primordialism and therefore the nationalistic point of view was wrong in the sense that the nations was, or the humanity was not divided naturally into nations. Okay, nationalism and the nation were historical constituencies that were found in the modern era. In other words, they were a consequence of the transition from an agrarian to a modern era. Now, these two paradigms, primordialism and modernism, had a very productive dialogue between each other. And inside primordialism, one could find a new way of approaching modernism, or a new way of criticizing modernism by accepting part of its premises. Okay, in this sense, the third classic paradigms, perennialism, shared both a mild primordialist and modernist point of view. In this sense, a perennialist could accept that nations and that nationalism and the nation were modern products, but at the same time, a perennialist also accepted the fact that you can fight nations and nationalism before the transition to modernity. And the very last classic paradigm, ethnosymbolism, broke away from the first three in the sense that it focused more on the subjective elements that the national community shared in order to identify itself as national. Okay, you had, for example, a common history, ancestors, a common language, a common culture, etc., etc., etc. So those were the subjective elements that ethnosymbolism studied or analyzed. Now, these classic paradigms were in place until the very end of the 20th century. One could say that around the late 1980s, early 1990s, classic paradigms declined in terms of authors started to think that the classic paradigms were not enough to explain the phenomena of nationalism and the nation. So new ways of thinking or approaching this phenomena came along in the literature, and this created four new paradigms that are grouped together under the label contemporary paradigms. The word contemporary, to be honest, or the label contemporary, only refers to its historical appearance in the literature. Okay, so those four paradigms that you see there are the newest, if you want to see it this way. So the first one is gender paradigm. This paradigm takes into account the portion of the population that was not given its importance in the classic paradigms. Okay, so women were now the focus of the study. Okay, women and how women articulated the identity of the community. Okay, traditionally, women are seen as those in charge of passing or giving the new generations that sense of belonging. Okay, through, for example, education. And this was the focus of the gender paradigm. Now, the second contemporary paradigm, narrative paradigm, takes into consideration how nationalism and the nation are discursively articulated in an everyday basis. This means that you don't need mass demonstrations towards the nation or mass rallies. It's an everyday basis, which is very subtle, but at the same time, it works in terms of implementing the image of belonging to the national community. Okay, it focuses on how the nation is built up, articulated via discourse. Okay, in a very post-structuralist point of view. Now, the third one, the post-colonial paradigm, describes how countries that were former colonies used nationalism to build its own identity, breaking away from the legacy of the metropolis. In this case, the classical example is India, but also in Latin America. This is a new approach towards recognizing minorities as national that before in the 19th century was not possible. Okay, And the last contemporary paradigm, the normative paradigm, it's more, rather than focusing on academic problems, okay, or analyzing cases, this last paradigm, the normative paradigm, focuses on accepting the fact that nationalism can be used to recognize via a civil, between brackets, a civil conception of the nation, where minorities could be recognized as national, but in a wider national community, which can all cohabit in the same state. Okay? Now, these two sets of paradigms, the classical paradigms and the contemporary paradigms, are very different in the sense that not only the different approaches can be organized under these two labels, but these two labels can be compared together. Okay, and this is the last part of the paper. Okay, the comparative framework that can be used to differentiate one paradigm for the other or one set of paradigms from the other. Okay, now the classic paradigms can be defined using four main key arguments. Okay, the first one is that classic paradigms use a grand narrative strategy that aims to have an explanation of nationalism and the nation that can be universally applied, in this sense that one studies India in the same ways as one studies Spain. Okay, nationalism and the nation basically do not take into account the context, okay, but focuses on a broad point of view that can be applied to every case that one studies. Okay. The second characteristic is that this accounts tries to answer the why, when, and how of the phenomenon. Okay. Normally, if one studies the classic paradigms, normally they focus on why, or how did they happen or came abroad in history, and when. Okay. To the point that many academic works of classic paradigms are normally focused on when is the nation, using the same title. Okay. Now the third characteristic is that these paradigms reinforce their own positions by confronting each other, in the sense that one paradigm cannot exist without the other. Okay. This is the classical dialogue of the slave and the lord. Okay, but applied to the academic world. Now, and the fourth and last characteristics is that these classic paradigms have a totalizing nature. Okay, context is taken as a secondary effect of the application of nationalism and the nation to the case. Now, the four characteristics that define contemporary paradigms and that differentiate them from the classic paradigms is that first, these contemporary paradigms are based on a heavy criticism towards the lack of attention from classic paradigms to certain portions of the population that were ignored. I know that the word ignored is a little bit too strong here, but I think that very well defines what actually happened. Okay, for example, women were ignored during the period of the classic paradigms, and these contemporary paradigms bring them in as a historic subject or a unit of analysis. Okay. Now, the second characteristic is that the contemporary paradigms run away from the classic macro-micro level of analysis. Okay, they introduce something that a methodology in political science, especially, is called the meso level of analysis. Okay, this means that the researcher can focus on subnational units of analysis, such as, for example, regions. Okay, now in Europe, the importance of regions is very present, to the point that in the European community we have the regional council. Okay, or the Council of the Regions that reinforces the importance of the regions nowadays. Okay, an addition to this point is that they also explore the effect of nationalism and the nation on the masses, on the ordinary people, rather than on the elites implementing the nation to the masses. Okay, the third characteristic is the dialogue between paradigms to reinforce their existence that define classic paradigms, okay, in the third point, is not present here, in the sense that one paradigm doesn't criticize the other. They can coexist when analyzing the same case study, to the point that an author can be defined or can be classified as supporting at the same time a post-colonial approach and a gender approach. Both are compatible, okay? And the last point here is that the rejection of the grand narrative strategy of the contemporary paradigms allows the scientific community that approaches these two phenomena to be completely interdisciplinary, without favoring one approach or the other. The classic paradigms were very determined by the academic background of those authors that studied during that period, the end of the Second World War to the end of the century, that normally were historians or sociologists. Now, this disappears in the contemporary paradigms, in the sense that no approach is favored, but as, or linking to a third point, they interlink between each other, giving us a more detailed picture of the phenomenon. Okay, and so the future agenda in terms of the study of nationalism and the nation, my point of view is that we will see a new breakthrough in the literature, considering how the globalizing scenario in which the national states locate themselves will tend to be diluted by the pressures that this new global scenario or global structure, political structure, will be affected by the forces of those national states that do not want to renounce their sovereignty, but at the end, on the opposite side, want to bring back to their own political influence their sovereignty in detriment of supranational institutions. We can see this in Europe with the tensions between populist movements such as the Five Star Movement and the European Union, and we see this also happening in Spain with the fascist group Vox and claiming sovereignty back from the EU. Okay, so this has been my presentation, and thank you very much for letting me approach this modern phenomenon.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. It's amazing. And I also have more questions now. It's okay. So let me see. I don't know if Tatiana is ready, so maybe I would leave Tatiana for the end if she doesn't mind. I know she's online already. But I guess that so now I'll just follow, and then Tatiana can be the last one. It's okay, Oscar. What do you think?
If Tatiana can, I don't know, because she has problems with the audio and the image and the program. But I think she's following the explanations. I think what I would like that she can present today. But if it's not possible, she can present another day.
Sure,
but,
sure. It's okay. So I'll just follow the schedule of today, and the next one is Gustavo Baretieri from Rio de Janeiro. Yeah?
Okay.
So let's go. You have 10 to 12 minutes. The room is yours.
Okay. I will try to open here my presentation.
Yeah, go slowly.
Yeah. Everyone is saying it. Can you all listening to me too?
No, we can listen you, but the presentation is the presentation of Guillermo. We are looking at the presentation of Guillermo.
Sorry. I'll go again.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Yes.
Yes,
now,
perfect.
Everyone is listening to me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect.
Well, so let's start. My name is Gustavo Baretieri. I am from Brazil. I am a law student. I will graduate in the next month. And as Aziz said, this is my first speech too. So it will be like a challenge. I'm kind of challenging myself doing this. I will talk about the cimbrians and their law, a possibility of Langobard Laws continuum. Well, my work, it seems like a roller coaster in different subjects, because I will talk about the cimbrians history a little bit, about the history of the law, and about the philosophy of the law. What motivates me to go to work with this, it's my personal background, because I am a descendant of these cimbrians that joined Brazil in the end of the 19th century. Well, the basis and the theoretical framework. Throughout this essay, I worked with the idea of continuity or discontinuity of the legal order, trying to dialogue its premises with the cimbrians' history. Paolo Grossi was the main reference for this work, and I bring at least two great premises of his book L'Ordine Giuridico Medievale to my work. The general objectives, I try to dialogue the Paolo Grossi's premises with other Thomist author, José Pedro Galvão de Souza, always emphasizing the medieval legal pluralism phenomenon. And in the specific objective, I am trying to extend Savigny's idea of Langobard Laws use, supported by the idea of other authors such as Montesquieu, Verci, Pertile, and etc. So, the premises established by Paolo Grossi, it's also what I try to discuss in general objectives of my work. The idea that a natural right and transcendental purpose for human being was present both in classical antiquity and also in the medieval period. With the modern state, it happened a discontinuity caused by a change of the values in the purpose of life and in the meaning of law. The law in the modernity acquires the sense of state norm, and we are no longer concerned with the transcendental purpose of the human being as we were in the past. The second premise is that the idea of discontinuity also, when it concerns in a totalizing power psychology, which was present in classical antiquity with the Roman Empire, it was absent in the Middle Ages, and so present in the modern state. So the specific objective will be, it will be inside of this point of the absent in the Middle Ages, because in the Middle Ages we don't have this idea of a totalizing power or the state or trying to control every aspect of our lives. So in the specific objective of this work was explore the legal order in the Middle Ages and bring the hypothesis of Langobard Laws application in the cimbrian community statutes. How is that possible? This was the question. But to trying to explain a little bit with a little bit more specific, the cimbrians are a group, minority linguistic group of Germans that live in northern Italy, that they speak a Bavarian dialect. A part of them lives in Veneto, and another part lives in Trentino Sud Tirol. And they were divided like in two different sovereignties. The province of Trento belongs in the past to the Austrian Empire, and the Veneto belongs to the Italy and Republic of Venice. In the Cimbrian territory, there was a spread use of several laws as a manifestation of the principle of the personality of the laws. So we can see, like reading old documents about the Salic law being applied in the territory, the Roman law, the Swabian law, the Bavarian law, but the prevalent law was the Langobard until the 13th century at least. I'll make here just to make more clear the whole panorama of the situation. Here is the specific region where they live. It's in the pre-alpine, the pre-Alps. That's why scholars used to call this as a German settlements in the pre-alpine German settlements. This red line, it's precisely where is the border between Tyrol and Republic of Venice. As we can see here, the communities like the Sieben Gemeinden, which is the seven communi, and the 13 Gemeinden is the 13 Comuni Veronesi, and the other ones here in the Tyrol area. Yeah. And giving a continuity of the speech of the objective aspects of my work, Savigny mentions that in the 14th century, in some parts of the territory of the Italian peninsula, the Langobard law had fallen out of use. In others, it was preserved as a personal right of the part of its inhabitants. In others, it had become a common right, which means it governed all those who lived in a territory. Here, the idea is that the Langobard law that was used by individuals, when it used by a lot of individuals in the same territory, it became part the law in a territory. It becomes like a territorial law, not more like in the medieval legal pluralism as just a single law of an individual. It's still part of the medieval legal pluralism, but as a right of a community. And that's the idea also of Savigny, that he said the Langobard law was the right of the village community, and Roman law was consulted only as a subsidiary law. Well, here is an example of a document. There are a lot of documents like this, but this one, I think it's a beautiful document. It's the confirmation of the privileges of the Serenissima Repubblica di Venezia for the faithful men of the seven communi in the agrarian region of Vicenza. These privileges extended out to the Middle Ages until its point of rupture with the Napoleonic invasion that was extinguished, I think that following the Turgot Edict and also the Le Chapelier law. That was two instruments that the revolutionaries in France created before their invasions in this region. So it was abolished, these privileges, almost in the end of the 18th century. I think that we can like think about like a relative idea that we might compare in some circumstances with the fueros in Spain, with the privileges of the Vasconian, with the other people that used to live in a border area too, like instruments for them to pacify the borders or to make it more established, to say like this. So the whole job here in my article was to create an hypothesis that the old Germanic law institute's application was linked to the feudal law, as if there was a continuum of medieval legal pluralism phenomenon until its process rupture point with Napoleonic invasion. In this sense, the privilegi statuti or carte di regole that were long-standing instruments for ordering community rules and use and management of cimbrians collective property, decided through assemblies, would have kept elements of the previous order, So it was from the phenomenon of the personality of the laws to the feudal law, to the privileges that they conserved in these privileges the old law. And that this difference of Savigny's idea that was until the 14th century, I'm speaking about like 400 years more, until the end of the 18th century. It was an hypothesis that I think that to confirm this, I should study more different kind of institutes of the law, such as Arimania and Vicus, Massaria, and another kind of institutes of the Langobard law to see and compare with other Frankish laws and etc. to see if it's possible to confirm this hypothesis or not. So this is my presentation. This is my contact. I thank you all for your attention, and I'm here for other questions later.
Thanks a lot.
Well,
Yeah, that's really amazing. Yeah, so thanks, Gustavo. Great.
thank you.
This one has dialogue to history. I mean, history of law or legal history or something like this. That's great. Minorities on legal history. So now I will just ask Oscar to give his speech. And I guess that's yeah, Oscar. So it's your turn.
Okay, thank you, Monique.
It's yours. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, my paper is on recognition. The idea of recognition is having increasing interest in different theories today, in political philosophy especially. There is a term, there is a movement that is called the struggle for recognition, and is especially analyzed in these three authors that I have used, that is Honeck, Taylor, and Fraser, especially Honeck. And the idea is that in the history of ideas, there is a struggle of preservation. The objective of human beings is self-preservation. This is an idea that is in Hobbes and in Machiavelli. But from the Hegelian point of view, in Hegel, in the philosophy of law of Hegel, there is a paragraph that explains the relationship of the slave and the master. And this dynamics is called the struggle for recognition. And now it's applied of the struggle of different minorities in order to achieve recognition. And we are going to see in this presentation what means recognition, what means the lack of recognition. And in these three authors, especially Honeck, and in the second idea is that we are going to place, we are going to see what is the place of hate speech in these theories of recognition. Okay, Honeck, Aziz Honeck is a professor, I think now is in the University of Frankfurt, is one of the disciples of Habermas. He has several books about recognition, and for his ideas, recognition is a core value, is a central value. And for me, these ideas of recognition are very interesting for the multiculturalism, for the multiculturality, because when I was studying the question of hate speech, I was trying to discover what theory there is behind these ideas of hate speech. And hate speech is a form of disrespect and is a lack of recognition. And my intuition was in this paper, in this presentation, is that this form of disrespect or humiliation, this lack of recognition, has a rule in the theory of recognition. If Honeck considers that recognition is a central value, what is the rule of recognition in the rule of the lack of recognition that consists of hate speech in this own theory. Okay, there are 3 levels. The first level is love, and it's on family relations and intimate relations. And the lack of this element is the physical integrity and the forms of disrespect are abuse and rape. The second level is legal respect, and the examples of disrespect are the denial of rights and exclusion, and the threatened component of nationality is social integrity. And the third level is solidarity, achievement, or esteem. And the examples of disrespect are denigration and insults, and the certain component of personality is honor and dignity. Okay, later I am going to explain where is this schema, where is hate speech, because I think this is a key point. But we can, well, I do now. Okay, my problem was that love, for Honeck, hate is not the contrary of love. This is very interesting. In the first level, it's not the level of hate speech, because the lack of recognition at this level is physical integrity, is abuse and rape. This is the level of hate crimes, but not hate speech. And I think the level of hate speech is the level that consists of denigration and insults. That is the level of social esteem, but we are going to see this later. Okay, Taylor's approach is different than from Honeck. He defends that there are 2 main values, equal dignity and differentiated identity. And there is equal dignity began at the 18th century, and differentiated identity, according to Taylor, is in the 20th century. Maybe it's related with the Berlin Wall fall. I'm not sure. It's not clear in the text, but maybe. But well, Taylor explains that this differentiated identity has comes from the 20th century. Both are universal, and both are in tension, are not in the same direction. The relationships are not always pacific. Okay, Honeck criticized Taylor because for Taylor, these values are recent, and for Honeck, these values are historical. And Honeck defends that there is only one main value, that is recognition, and from Taylor, there are 2 main values, that are equal dignity and differentiated identity. Okay, Fraser and Honeck has an interesting book that it's a debate between them. And okay, I like very much this debate, and it's very interesting, the consequences and the debates of these, the different approaches on this debate. And okay, we have class politics, redistribution, distributive justice, equality, inequality. This is one approach. And we have identity politics, struggles over gender, sexuality, national minority, ethnicity, and race, identity, equality, difference, another paradigm, recognition. Okay, and what Fraser says, this is not a dilemma, this is not a choice. We have to combine redistribution and recognition. Okay, but the point, not in the paper, and this is not in the presentation, the point is that usually the main approach to justice is distributive. is redistribution. It's materialistic. Some people consider that it's only recognition as Honeck, but only two main authors like Fraser, Nancy Fraser, and Iris Maran-Young considers that is recognition and a combination of recognition and redistribution. Also, I consider that is a combination of redistribution and recognition, and a third value that it's inclusion, that it's the political dimension. But okay, this is for another day. Okay, and the idea is that Fraser says we have to combine properly redistribution and recognition, and subordinated groups has maldistribution and misrecognition. And the key point is that Honeck says, first, there is misrecognition, and as a consequence, there is maldistribution. But first, there is an absolute misrecognition, and this is the main point. Okay, these are the conclusions that I have told before about Honeck. Hate is not the opposite of love. Hate speech fits better with the social esteem level, which considers disrespect as denigration and insult. And hate crimes with physical violence, if this violence is public, this means it's a form of racism, xenophobia, misogyny, fits better with legal respect. And if it's private, with family friendship, maybe the place is the level of love. Well, this classification, I'm not quite sure. Because now gender violence in Spain is a public question. It's not only private; it's a public question. But maybe in gender violence is a question of misogyny. Well, this is complicated, but I think could be. Yes. These ideas of Taylor, I repeat the idea that Honeck and Taylor are Hegelian, but for Taylor, there are two values, equal dignity and differentiated identity, and one is from the 18th century, the other is from the 20th century, and Honeck considers that the recognition is an older and deeper movement. And, okay, the idea of Fraser is that redistribution and recognition are co-original. This means that we cannot explain economic injustice in terms of cultural injustice, and we cannot explain cultural injustice in terms of economic injustice. For Honeck, the problems always are from cultural injustice, and derived are economic injustice, but first cultural injustice. My final slide, my final conclusion and the final slide is an interesting question about what are the economic consequences of hate speech for minority members? What happens if the majority considers the difference as a stigma? This is linked with a paper of the first day of the minority and immigration of the epistemic justice. Okay, the main idea is for Honeck the absolute priority of recognition, while Fraser defends recognition and redistribution are co-original and should be properly combined. Maybe it's a slight difference, but it is an important difference in both theories. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here today, and I will answer all your questions if you want to ask, of course, and we can debate later. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks a lot, Oscar. Very amazing paper.
I don't know how to quit the paper. I don't know how to.
how to just.
Okay, yeah. No, yeah, okay, okay.
Yes, thanks a lot. So, I'd like to make some. So I'll start with the questions now. I will start with. So, Dr. Ramesh, would you mind if we just make first the questions here, and then we will just open to everybody make the questions, please? I'll just start with the questions for the guys, and then after you can make all the questions you want. It's okay, please? So we can just have a kind of a schedule, yeah? So I'll start with the questions to Aziz, and then to Guillermo, and then to Gustavo, and then to Oscar. Just follow the schedule here, yeah? So, Aziz, my question for you is like the same. I could see that you, I had the impression that your work the recognition, and we have some other kind of recognition also, but it seems that to me your framework was the legal recognition. So first of all, I'd like to know if this impression is correct, because it's your work. So yeah, thanks a lot. So and I can see also that for me, like the legal acts you presented, they review some kind of legal recognition because they guarantee, at least at the legal level, some civil and other kind of rights. But and so I'd like to know, what do you see by this kind of if they guarantee some kind of civil rights and other kind of rights? I see also in your text that you write a lot that there is no recognition. There is no recognition. How can you deal with this? Also say there is no recognition, but you also describe a lot of legal acts with civil recognition. So this is the first point. Yeah. What's the kind of nature of framework of recognition you see would be the most appropriate, maybe, or to give the legal recognition for these minorities? Because, like you say that Russia, it has no minority definition, for instance, and Kazakhstan, on the other hand, has some legal definition. You reproduced it in your paper. So, as researcher, yeah, once is the way of recognition, the instrument for this. And the other thing I'd like to ask now, it's also because of your speak now. Do you use any kind of operational concept of minority on your research? Because, you know, to talk about recognition, we also should, I mean, that's what I think. If you to talk about recognition, if you also have some kind of concept of minority, because you describe the countries once, the legal order, but what's yours? I mean, Aziz's operational concept you use to define, to work with minorities, yeah. And the other thing is that what kind of structure or framework you think would be more adequate than the ones you gave us. And the other one, sorry, that's the third question. If you see some kind of limitations from social reality to improve these legal framework that the countries have, yeah. For instance, social conflicts or some kind of prejudice or discrimination, but on social level, not on legal level, yeah. That because these social conflicts, they can be a kind of a challenge to make the legal order to be applied. So these are the questions I would like to have to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Monique. Yeah, indeed. What I did is try to look at what is in the law, so the legal recognition, because as I said, this is a new topic for me, so I didn't really want to get into too much detail of the area that I just started to investigate. So yeah, I looked at the law, and you rightly pointed out that I say there is no recognition, but there are still some legal acts that govern the minority rights protection. So, and as I said, what I try to look at is this indirect recognition, which emerges in case of absence of official recognition. Some countries, for example, in Europe, Poland or Germany, they have a established procedure for recognizing minorities. So they have a list of recognized minorities who are recognized officially, and that they are granted some rights and so on. But in these three countries that I had a look, they don't have this kind of procedure, but they have rights that are similar to the countries that have official recognition established. They have not the rights, but the legal regulations. So what I try to do is to connect this indirect recognition to these rights, which I see as a result of states' action. So they somehow they are halfway recognizing that there are minorities. Some of them they even mention specifically, and they provide some rights, but at the same time, it might be for different reasons, maybe lack of administrative resources or finances. They don't want to have a fully fledged recognition procedure. I guess that would also increase their commitment on international level, on national level, to protect the rights of minorities already in institutionalized manner. And when it comes to the operational concept of minority, you're right, I completely missed that point. I should have defined what I mean under minority. What I was going is mainly in line of Francesco Capotorti's definition, so that minority is a community that differs from the majority by religion, ethnicity, and so on, but also is usually placed on a less favorable political situation than a majority community. So they have somehow challenged access to power, to resources. But what I also would add here is that also minority self-organizes as such. It shouldn't be a state or a researcher who defines what minority is. So you just come to the group and say, you guys are minority because I think so. But it should be the minority who's from the grassroots level organizes as such. And that would be via different means. That would be an organization they established that runs to protect their identity, a political party, right, and so on. So that would be my sort of operational, somehow optimized operational concept, Aziz, as you said. And what else was there? Wait, I wrote them down. Right, the limitations to the social reality. So if the social reality can actually limit the legal improvement of the situation. I think it actually can be challenged if there are some conflicts and there is some animosity between minority communities, especially if one of the communities is a majority. And then they would be, we assume they would be against establishing official recognition mechanism. What I would say is that states usually don't want to officially recognize a specific minority because either they don't want to grant access to minority rights because it's usually state is run by majority, so there might be some individual reasons, or they lack resources because once they have established the official recognition mechanism, then there is a commitment following that. But I still believe that recognition, official mechanism should be there because it might help to tackle or to prevent some of the social conflicts. Because what I imagine could happen is if a minority is recognized, then it would be some awareness raising happening in the country. So minorities would be learning about other communities, about their culture, and then state would be embracing them in a way that providing them somehow legitimacy, attributing some kind of a state support, which can actually mitigate some conflicts among communities. On the other hand, if the communities still, after officially recognized, still face some discrimination, then they would have some effective channel to refer to their rights. So they say, we have a minority status now, there are some institutions, I presume, and so on, so they would be better informed about their rights too. Right, I think, I hope I covered your questions. If you have some more, I'll be happy to.
Yeah. Yeah, but okay, I will just make other questions after, because now I have more questions for you. But if I make them now, then we will not have time to
Exactly.
make
We
out
should
the
have
other.
it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
but that's really interesting. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
So I'd like to make now the question to Guillermo. Is this Guillermo is there?
Yes,
Yeah.
can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so Guillermo, I had a kind of impression that you make a kind of critics of this totalizing characteristic of the classic models of nationalism. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is the objective of your work, but somehow I can see these critics on your work. So, and how do you make the relation between these contemporary paradigms and recognition? I mean, because I see that the conceptions you bring from contemporary nationalism, they bring what I called like the social actor, the historical subject. I mean, the individual, the person as protagonism, the social movement as protagonism. So in this case, I can see that that's my question for you. Do you this kind of your work is more descriptive, or do you see also these classifications as a potential instrument to emancipate these groups? That's the first thing. If you see more nature of descriptive, theoretical, methodological concept to be used in other strategies, in other political strategies, for instance, or do you think that they can be already a kind of political instrument itself if we use them, for instance, as a discourse? You know, like when we see the discourse as a macro power in a society, for instance. That's my question. I make you this question because the post-colonial view you brought from contemporary nationalism, because, for instance, there are some countries here in Latin America, like Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, and some others, and this contemporary nationalism they have in a post-colonial way, they really bring it into his constitutions, and they really make a kind of social revolution inside, and they really make a lot of other kind of revolution. For instance, they to deal with the environment, they brought the Pachamama, that's the nature in the center of the legal order. So this is revolutionary, I would say. This is really revolutionary, you know, to bring the nature as a social actor, something like this, like a historical actor, like the protagonism of the constitution. This is revolutionary. I don't know if it will work or not, but this process is revolutionary. So that's my question for you. And yeah, I guess you understood.
Yes. Sure, no problem. Now, the first question was that if in my paper I criticize what I call the totalizing nature of classic paradigms, or if I had a critique implicit in my description. Now, I'm going to say no and yes at the same time. Now, I'm going to explain myself. When I mean no, I mean no because I take into account that the classic paradigms were the first attempt to understand the phenomenon. Now, we academics have the tendency to try to find answers that can be applied universally. It's our tendency. This is a tendency that can be found in every field of knowledge in academia, in social science. Okay, natural sciences have their own dynamics. So no, I don't criticize the totalizing nature or characteristic of the classic paradigms, but at the same time, I criticize if that was the final stage of the study of nationalism and the nation. So we have to accept it was the first attempt, totalized in nature, perfect, but that wasn't the end, and that is why the critics or the criticism towards the totalized in nature were diluted with the new approaches. I don't know if this the yes and the no make sense. Okay, it's no because it's first attempt, but yes if it was the last. Okay, now in terms of the second was if there was a relation between the contemporary paradigms and recognition of minorities. But the second and the third, I'm going to try and answer the second and the third with in 1 or 2 minutes. So I think that they can be answered together. Now, I'm going to say yes, the contemporary paradigms are a very good instrument towards recognition, okay? But always take into account that this recognition, so these contemporary paradigms belong only to academia, in the sense that to bring that contemporary paradigm, let's call it post-colonial, let's call it narrative, let's call it normative, to bring that from academia or to translate that from academia into the constitutional order, as you put the example of the Pachamama. Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think that the Brazilian constitution has or talks about happiness, reaching happiness. Okay, this is something that is not found in any other place, especially if we compare it to Europe, right? So, yes, the contemporary paradigms are a good instrument, but we need a political translation. Okay, the Pachamama can be the political translation. Not only that, but bringing in subnational units of analysis or actors or historical subjects of study, for example, indigenous people, okay, need to be articulated in a manner that they produce rights and duties. You can say it this way, okay? So the contemporary paradigms are a good instrument, okay, but they need to be politically translated. I don't know if this answers 1, 2, and 3, but I give it a chance. Okay.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. I just took some notes because this political translation is something that after I'd like to ask you more about it.
Sure, of course, no problem.
Amazing, amazing. So now the question for, let me see, Gustavo. That's a question that's quite similar to Guillermo. I would say, yeah. If you see this kind of, if you make this criticism to modern states or not, I mean, if the criticism is this the main objective of your work or not, and if you see some kind of non-state social actions in benefit of those communities. And nowadays, I would say, because you just brought some influences, because I can see that your work it's on the boundaries between legal theory. I guess this can be a little more maybe developed on the time, but I can see your work more in the field of legal history. I would say like this, and when we have a historical process. I can see your work is a kind of trying to translate some kind of institutions during their time until nowadays, so we can see this kind of pluralism as a process, yeah? And this historical process would be one aspect of this community's identity nowadays. So this is a huge field to work. Legal history is a very challenging field because we cannot build another narrative, because if not would be in history, but we also should make some methodological concepts and legal theory and all these things. So I can see it's a project for life on a good way. Yeah. But that's my first question for you. This would be like this, yeah? So.
Okay. So, first of all, I should say that I am very surprised at the same time that I know that my work, it's not like a deep approach of this study, but I really figure it out when I read the Guillermo and Aziz presentation that I need to approach the subject of the nationalism and the ethnicity, because I didn't develop this inside my work. Well, this is the first time, the first point that I noticed that I am failing in my article. Well, the second part is that, yeah, I try to develop the idea of a continuity in a process that it's really hard to understand, because we don't have like a lot of perspectives inside the Middle Ages, the history of the law in the Middle Ages. So we have some amazing authors such as Tommaso d'Aquino. We have now Paolo Grossi, that's a good one. Savigny, that try to work with the history of the law even in the Roman law in the Middle Ages. And sometimes it's hard to understand how this old experience could impact in the future. And I notice that in the Middle Ages, the political representatives, and this, I think that it might dialogue with the Guillermo's idea of how can we translate that in a political representatives. And I think that in the Middle Ages, they had this. Even if now I don't know if, I don't want to start like to enter in a difficult question. I don't want to put myself in difficult situations, but they had an imperative mandate in the past. And now the people that are elected, they have an open mandate. Sometimes they are elected with a purpose, and nowadays they have another one. That as individuals, they are more like, how can I say, they are more easily caught by political strength powers, by the money powers as individuals. And in the past, with the community, they wasn't, because the representatives of the community have an imperative mandate. They go there to the political power to show what the community needs. In this sense, I think that we can dialogue with the present. There are now in the Südtirol, the historical Tyrol, and what they call Euroregione. It's called Euregio Tirolo. That it's the union of the representatives of the provinces of Trento, Bozen, and Innsbruck, which compose the Tyrol historic, to say like this. Unfortunately, it doesn't involve the Cimbrian minority in Veneto, but I think that it's a different way to respond, to give an answer to this, not like begging for the state help, but the people associating themselves, creating like powers between the individual and the state. And we can see that they are in like two states. It's the province of Tyrol in Austria, the state of Tyrol, the Landes Tyrol in Austria, and the provinces of both Bozen and Trento. So it's a kind of intermediate groups between the individual and the state, and it's not like the individuals going to the state. It's a different process. In the European community, I don't know, maybe it's a kind of light, or I don't know, it's just an idea that I am not trying to be like a revolutionary, but because I don't feel that I'm this need, but I think that people used to feel the needs, and it's easier to capture this in the communities. where the problems happen, where the people can make it easier. And these communities in historical places, the same historic roots, as I can, if it's possible to say like this, I think that it's easier for them to organize them, and maybe with imperative mandates, trying to make this representation in another kind of dialogues with the European power. I don't know if I should.
Yeah, and bring it to nowadays also, because all these processes should maybe help to understand how is the community working with these costumes now. That's nowadays, yeah, the impact and all these things. That's quite important for its specific identity nowadays and his economic development. So that's good. So now to Oscar.
Hello.
Hi, Oscar. How long time? Yeah, so I have some questions for you that actually I feel quite interesting, the dialogue between Fraser and Honneth, because I have to tell you, Honneth for me is a kind of an author that I always think him much more idealistic than in the material way. I would say like this. I have my how can I say? I read Honneth and I think, this guy is so idealistic. How can I bring Honneth into real life, into social reality, into the social conflicts that we have on the day-by-day life? That's my first question for you. Yeah, how Honneth can be. Actually, I was waiting so long, Oscar, because I know you study Honneth so much, and I have this question for some years since I started reading about Honneth. I think Fraser is a little more pragmatic in a good way, I would say. With Fraser, we can maybe think about some public policies itself, you know, like redistribution, an economic way. So that's the first thing I would like to ask you. And I have another question. Like, what kind? I mean, this is question maybe we can also discuss in another way, in another place. But I would just make it here. What kind of minorities do you think that can be understood by those? Because, for instance, the immigrants. About the immigrants, I would say it's quite difficult to bring immigrants' problems into Fraser framework, because the immigrants is not only about redistribution, for instance, yeah, these public policies of economic development, I would say like this. It's quite different from this. And immigrants nowadays, it's not, I would say, a minority, but it seems like because of the discrimination and prejudice these people suffers. I would say like this. Yeah. Do you think it's possible to make this? And yeah. And when you say the hate speech is also a question of, you make this question, as hate speech is also a question of redistribution. Yeah, taking Nancy Fraser as the theoretical framework. This is something I'd like to know if you have already some more issues about it, or if this will be future research. Okay, I guess, yeah, it's this. Thanks a lot, Oscar.
Very, very interesting. Okay, well, there are complicated issues here. There are a bit complicated questions, but very interesting. The first point is that Honeck is always misunderstood. I am not a real specialist on Honeck. I have just begun to read Honeck, and my expertise is on cultural pluralism, and Honeck, it was present but not special. Now I have read Honeck, and now I have understand more or less what is the approach of Honeck. And your question about idealism and materialism is a question, if you want, of the I like classics, and it's a question about Hegel and Marx. No, you are telling me why Honeck is not more Marxist, no, more or less. Why is not more materialist? Why is not telling about social conditions and more redistribution, distributive justice? My point, and the point of Honeck, is that Honeck is quite an interesting approach, because Honeck is referring to prejudice and stereotypes, and is referring to the stigma, and difference as a stigma, and the lack of recognition. And if you focus justice in the lack of recognition and disrespect and prejudice and stereotypes, you are talking not about material conditions, but about more idealistic conditions, more spiritual conditions, more. It's more Hegel. It's more the Seligkeit, not the Kantian terms, but the Hegelian terms. And I like this point. I agree with Honeck in this point. But the problem with Honeck is that he focuses completely in recognition, and explains all in cultural terms. And in my view, we have to combine the cultural terms, the economic terms, and the political terms, the inclusion, redistribution, and recognition. This is my approach to theories of justice. Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me? Okay. And this is for the first point. For the second, about the immigrants, yes. Well, you know that from international law, immigrants are not a minority. From the point of view of the international law, minorities are only considered the nationals of a country, and immigrants are not minorities. But this is something formal. This is something academic from the international law approach. Immigrants are minorities because are powerless and are discriminated. And I think you said, well, we disagree in this, Monique. We have a disagreement because you said that immigrants, we cannot apply to the immigrants the redistribution and recognition approach or framework, or this framework cannot be applied to immigrants. Okay, I disagree. I think immigrants are distributed and misrecognized. And in these terms, for example, misrecognized. What does mean misrecognized immigration? In a series of television that making jokes against immigrants, or caricaturize immigrants, or political parties who blame immigrants of the crisis of the health service or the crisis of education. This is prejudice. The stereotypes are important in the political agenda and are important in political philosophy. That's the idea. And finally, the question of hate speech and redistribution, I think, is interesting. For this reason, okay, there is a famous theory about Owen Fish, the professor of Yale, that says that hate speech has a silencing effect on minorities, with minorities. If you use hate speech against minorities, the next time you see someone from the minorities, you are going to not hear what they are telling. Okay, this is Owen Fish. This is the silencing effect of minorities. The same thing could happen, and this is connected with the systemic justice of the other day. The same thing could happen with someone with a link or conceive the difference as a stigma or belonging to a minority with stereotypes or prejudice against a minority. for example, the Roma minority in Europe, the Roma minority was, and I think this is not only a question of stereotypes and prejudice and these things, because this is the origin of mal-redistribution, and I am sure of this. I think it's a combination of redistribution and recognition. In summary, the Honeck approach, but I prefer Fraser. That's my summary of. I want to investigate more Honeck, but by the moment, I prefer Fraser.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, me also. I prefer Fraser. I would say this is interesting because actually for Latin America, Fraser is more, I would say, closer to our reality, and that's interesting because, for instance, Honeck is also from School of Frankfurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why we think like, oh, he's okay. That's this, but that's interesting. So now I'd like to open for questions. I guess that Oscar also have some questions for the present.
Yeah, yes, Monique, how you want to organize? Maybe if all the audience make the questions and then the final turn answering all the questions. Do you think
okay if you prefer? If you prefer.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe if all the audience make all the questions and the final turn answering all the questions, could be this good or?
Okay, sure, sure.
It's a question of time, and I think it's good for all. Okay. Well, I will be quickly. Yes, I have some questions. I follow the order. Then for Aziz, okay, I have the doubt about if these national minorities includes nation building processes, and these nation building processes are enforced by a state. What is the role of the state in the national building processes of these national minorities? This will be the first question. Okay, and the second is that you use the term national minority, I think minority, indigenous minority. Okay, here, okay, for example, in our university, we have a lot of Latin American students that has a connection or are linked with indigenous peoples. And we have always debates with the national minorities in Europe and the Latin American indigenous peoples. And we are always comparing the national minorities in Europe and the indigenous people in Latin America. Right. And one of the difference is that indigenous people are against development or certain concept of development and certain concept of progress, or they are against certain views of capitalism and development. My point is, my question is these indigenous minorities, in the case that you have explained it, are also against capitalism and progress in this question, and then there are other ethnic minorities, other national minorities that don't put in question these issues. That's my questions for Aziz. Sorry. Okay. I go quickly. Guillermo, my question is this new paradigm of gender. Okay, there is a famous article that it's is multiculturalism bad for women? Well, is nationalism bad or good for women? That's my question. How works this gender paradigm? And the second is this post-colonial approach that I think Monique likes this post-colonial approach and is so work in Latin America for the scholars of Latin America. Okay, the idea is usually criticize the colony, but how explains the nationalism of these new countries? For example, I had experience with these Latin American students that they blame the colony for the patriarchalism and they blame the colony for the feminism. and always the colony has been guilty of patriarchalism and feminism, and maybe they are them. What they have their own values, or they build some values inherited, but part built. Well, I don't know. Okay, and finally, the paper of Gustavo. It's a set of history and sociology of law, and history of law and sociology of law. My point is what affects this with current affairs, what affects the cimbrians to current affairs and the current nation building, or the ongoing nation building process in Italy. And if today they are a national minority or linguistic minority, and if they have recognized individual or collective rights to this minority in Italy nowadays. That's my questions. Thank you very much.
Shall we also take more questions, or?
Yeah. So what do you prefer, Oscar? We can collect your questions.
You are the chair.
Maybe, yeah, okay. So Ramesh want to make some questions. Questions from everybody now. So participants can answer everything at once. Go,
Thank
Ramesh.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have written on chat box, why do few individuals, public nexus, are misusing derogatory remarks and defamatory language on social media? I have written in the chat box that my question is to Professor Oscar, why do few individuals are using derogatory remarks and defamatory language on social media? You understand? Please. Box. In the chat box, you can see why do few individuals are using derogatory remarks and defamatory language on social media.
Okay, let's find here. A few individuals nexus are misusing derogatory remarks and defamatory language on social media.
Yes, please.
Yes. So would you like to address the question to some presenter, or
Oscar, Dr. Oscar Pérez D.
Okay, so this is for Oscar. Thanks.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay. This is only this one, Ramesh, or I'd like to make more questions?
Please.
Okay. Okay, so.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. There are some others that would like to make more questions, or can I open for?
I want to do one to Aziz, if I'm allowed.
Go.
Okay. I want to maybe Aziz hasn't got the, or this opens the ground for a new paper, but my question to Aziz, or maybe this can be divided into two questions. The first one is a very interesting presentation of informal recognition of rights. Excellent presentation. My first question is, if these informal procedures that you have outlined in the three case studies, do they lead to the same recognition of rights and duties that formal procedures do? Yes? Understood the first question?
Yeah.
And my second question is, sorry to bring this to my field of knowledge, which is political science, but I will try to do this easy enough for a colleague. This informal procedure is being used by these minorities as a form of para-diplomacy in the international arena? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, those are my two questions for Aziz. And if Oscar doesn't mind, I know that Oscar is been receiving questions from everybody, but I'm going to add two more if I'm allowed. So the first one is, do you think that hate speech can be a consequence of recognition? Now, I explain myself. In recognizing the self-identity of a group, can lead this group to express their self-determination via hate speech? This is my first question. And my second question is, I'm going to take your point of view of Fraser and go a step further in opposite direction to Hoeneß. Right. If Hoeneß emphasizes recognition over redistribution, okay, can we go the opposite way and apply a Marxist point of view in the sense that redistribution leads to recognition? This is my second question to Oscar. I'm done now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think Monique has now problems with the connection, and maybe are there anyone? Is there anyone that wants to talk, wants to ask a question? Raise your hand, please. Well, if there is no anyone, we can proceed, and then Aziz, you can answer the questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you for questions, very interesting ones. I will try my best to answer. Some of them I haven't really thought about, as Guillermo's ones, but they're very provoking. So, Oscar, about your questions, if there is a nation-building processes that include national minorities, from what I can tell is, for example, in Kazakhstan, that officially has announced the civic identity building processes. So they try to foster a civic Kazakh, meaning all the people of Kazakhstan, not only the majority. But the interesting point here is, which also relates to Russia, that they still underline the majority, the somehow unique positioning of a majority community. For example, there's always this kind of vocabulary used when matters concern majorities, the unifying role of a certain majority, their historic role, and so on, and their culture is always predominant. So maybe some of the processes, nation-building processes, do include minorities, but majority communities still have a better standing there. And in terms of nationalism, I think in a country which is very centralized, as Russia or Kazakhstan, for minorities that already have a very limited scope of action, as do the other civil society organizations, it's very difficult to somehow self-organize and voice their claims, especially when it comes to self-determination and claims for autonomy. And there's a very tragic past example in Russia with the war in Chechnya, where the Chechen community tried to establish a republic on their own, which then resulted in 2 wars and multiple casualties and so on. So maybe there is nationalism, which is not very outspoken, but there's certainly nationalism coming from the governments and the majorities, because most of the processes that relate to nation building, they accommodate the needs of majority communities, which I don't think is a surprise. And when it comes to the indigenous communities, that will be about Russia, because that's what that's the country I covered for indigenous populations. I think what I can say from my very limited knowledge is that the concerns they share is somehow similar to the concerns of indigenous populations of Latin America. being that the modernization and industrialization somehow challenges the traditional livelihood and well-being of these communities. Especially, I talk about Russia now, that some communities have only 4 members, right, or like 100 members that consider them separate minority, separate indigenous community, and they live in a very far distant areas that don't really have communications with the center or with the periphery. But then the commercial interests and extractive industries challenge their well-being and challenge their traditional lifestyle that have been preserved for centuries. So I guess this is the concerns they share is quite akin to the concerns of other indigenous populations in developing countries. But what I find interesting here, again in the framework of Russia, is that for indigenous populations they have introduced this quota, this numerical criterion that says to be an indigenous community you should not exceed 50,000 people. While they also have some special set of rights, access to national resources and water and so on, hunting, reindeership. This is often violated again and is being sacrificed for industries, extractive industries. And then to Guillermo's questions about if it's the same when it comes to informal procedures, the results they yield. And I honestly didn't really compare that, so I can't really tell from the top of my head, but that's very interesting. Maybe this is what I will try to develop my research interest with the direction, because I don't want to speculate and see if the results are the same. What I can say is that the violation of rights for the challenges the minorities face are more or less the same. So in Russia, for example, or Lithuania, which doesn't have official recognition mechanisms, and some countries, for example, Poland, I would assume that some of the challenges may be that forced use of state language and lack of resources is shared. So these concerns might be similar, but I really want to see now, after your question, is actually what is the difference, and if there's some dramatic differences, that would be very interesting. So thank you for this question. About your second one, about the prior diplomacy, if minorities still use the semi-recognized status to negotiate or to raise their concerns, I would say yes, especially in these 3 countries, because they are all post-Soviet and they all have Russian populations, except for Russia, which it is a majority. So Russia, for both of the Russian populations in Lithuania and Kazakhstan, is a kin state, and these populations often use their minority status to reach out to their kin state in order to either to address their concerns, violations, or their grievances, especially in terms of Lithuania. In the case of Lithuania, Russians have established even a party. And for Kazakhstan, it is interesting because at some point, right after the independence, the Russian population was almost the same, or it was even more maybe than the Kazakh majority. So it was around 45%, and it has a bordering area. So as you can imagine, there is some power diplomacy going on different levels. But indigenous populations, I think, of Russia are based on the worst situation here because, first of all, there are so many of them, so they're not a unanimous group. And second of all, they don't have a kin state which they can work through. And third, maybe they are members of, some of them are members of some, there's like some Arctic unions and so on, unions of Far East. But yeah, it doesn't really come to this bilateral or multilateral state level negotiations or discussions that some minorities like Russians or Poles can enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thanks a lot. Answer the questions?
Yes, thank you very much for the questions. Very interesting. The first one, Oscar said, how does nationalism, or is nationalism bad or good for women? Now, this question requires more than a single answer and much research. But from the top of my head and in a very summarized way, I'm going to say that the traditional role, this is a very anthropologic point of view, but nonetheless, I'm going to give it. The traditional role of women in society has been they are the key member of the community that is able to transmit the image of the nation from one generation to the other. Okay, they do this complying or not, in the sense that they might be forced or not to do it, but at the end of the day, they are doing it. Okay, that's the fact. It's not a discussion; it's a fact. So, nationalism uses women as an instrument for its own means. Now, it's true that at least in Western countries, nationalism has oppressed women. Has oppressed women in the sense that they are only seen as objects to self-preserve the community. Okay, so in that sense, I have to answer that nationalism up to today has been negative for women. Now, the new paradigms can be translated in political recognition of the role of women and the break with the traditional role that they had in societies. Is that now in the process of being of seeing results of this? We need to wait. But it's true that in especially normative points of view of paradigm, not only multiculturalism, but the gender perspective of recognizing women with a new status, breaking from traditional roles, is a key point, and we can see this in the debates that are currently taking place in different countries through labor regulations, through abortion regulations, through marriage regulations, through divorce regulations, etc., etc., etc. So it's not only a matter of putting women in the center; it's a matter of translating that in a change in the constitutional framework for this new role to be effective. Okay. Now, the second question is, how does post-colonialism approach deal with nationalism in new or former colonies? Now, post-colonial theory identifies nationalism or the effects of nationalism I studied in two ways. First, post-colonial nationalist movements do not break away from the modern ways of production, in the sense that the European modes of production are incorporated to the community. What nationalism does in post-colonial countries is that they break, as Oscar correctly identifies, with the metropolis, in the sense that post-colonial nationalism builds national identities in former colonies in opposition to the metropolis. In this sense, there is this reinforcement of previous identities as the modern national communities. And we've seen this in Latin America. Our colleagues can give us many examples of this. Okay, but nationalism in post-colonial countries is A, doesn't break away from the modern modes of production, and B, breaks away from the image that comes from metropolis and articulates its own national identity in opposition to the metropolis. I think I've answered both with these statements.
Yeah, I would say it's quite not so simple, because this majority, the metropolitan speech is it's on our veins. So yeah, this kind of rupture, actually, this is much more, I would say, nowadays an ideal, a wish in progress. But I guess that we can see a lot of it's very small public policies, you know, isolated. I would say like this, trying to make new arrangements. And there's something because there are a lot of social movements. Okay, part of them from left wing, I would say like this, yes, that they can improve and emancipate a little more these thoughts or these new discourses against metropole or these things. So I would say they have this function, I would say like this, yeah. But on the other side, of course, you have establishment, yeah, that's already consolidated. So these kind of conflicts you can see in all kinds of, in all aspects, in economic and social, in day-by-day life, in all these things. So we called, for instance, about the structural racism, you know, the institutionalized racism. I mean, everybody says, no, nobody is racist in Brazil, for instance. Everybody loves the black people, for instance. But that's on the silence, you know, that the prejudice and discrimination appears itself, works, you know, that's the thing. So this is a good point to talk a little more. Yeah, sure, that's amazing. So now, Gustavo, would you like to answer the questions, please?
Yes. I have here the first question of Oscar about how the phenomenon affected the Italian nation building process. I will divide like in two phenomenons. The first one of the medieval legal pluralism affected the idea of autonomy itself, because if you visit these communities in northern Italy, and I think that even in another areas of Europe that are located like in the borders, as in Spain, for example, like Barcelona, the Catalonia, the Países Bajos, and the other. These territories in the borders, at least, they have a strong idea of autonomy. So I think that because they felt represented and make this representation, political representation, happen in the past, and they have this memory, even if now things are changing, but with this strong state we have now, that sometimes have some good characteristics of totalitarian states, because they are everywhere. The states are everywhere in our life. But in the beginning, they maintain this memory. The second part of this first question, I think that it's about the process that was interrupted with the Napoleonic invasion. In my article, I considered like the negative aspects of the French Revolution, in the meaning that when they introduced the Turgot Edict and the Le Chapelier Law, abolishing the structures that have these communities, they isolate the individuals. The individuals were like, as the author I use as a reference, José Pedro Galvão de Souza, said, the French Revolution isolated the individuals, leaving them in the hands of the modern monster, the Leviathan, the big state. And these individuals have sometimes no power to organize themselves as they used to do in the past. So I think that it was a huge impact. But in Italy building process, I think that we need to think that these communities were divided in at least two political sovereignties, different sovereignties. One in the Austrian border and the other one in the Italy border. So I think that even if now the province of Trento is part of Italy, I think they suffered more than the Venetian one, because they entered in the Italy context just after the First World War. And when it's exact point that fascism is growing. So there were lots of associations of the fascism in Trent that I have a lot of documents about their actions, prohibiting putting people that used to speak German in jail, a lot of things like this that they suffered a lot in this process. Well, I think that for the first question, it's like this. For the second question, if the cimbrians nowadays are reckoned, let's see the question I noticed here. Are the cimbrians nowadays a national minority or linguistic minority? Are some individual or collective rights recognized to this community? Yes, they are recognized as a linguistic minority group in the Article 6 of the Italian Constitution. It's there. There is the provision there that said that they will recognize the linguistic minority groups. But the fact is that the language nowadays, it's alive as a native language just in a small community. That's almost like 500 people that still speaks. So it's not like a big community. And I think that about the collective rights, like they used to have in the past, like collective properties, they are assemblies to make their political power feel more strong in their representatives in the state. It's more weak now. So the most part of the initiatives are more like to preserve the language, to publish books about their history. But I mean, in the meaning of political representatives, I think that it's not like a strong issue for in this sense. That's why I think that sometimes the Euregio Tirolo maybe could be an answer, or at least something to think about for the new kind of representation. I think that it was, yeah. I don't know if I answered, but I tried.
Yeah. Oscar.
Okay. Yes. Okay. The first question about the derogatory remarks in media. Well, we have few time, and I cannot talk about hate speech, but I am going to say a few things. The first, hate speech is regulated in different societies in different ways. And in one society is punished, and in other society is not punished. And the question is, the net is global. And for example, in the Yahoo case, the problem was that the anti-racist associations in France filed a suit against Yahoo. The servers of Yahoo are in United States, and this means that the United States says, okay, we have a free speech law that hate speech is not punished. Then we are going to apply this law to this case. No, okay. Well, there are some signs of hope. For example, in the question of the self-regulation in Europe, for example, we have a code of conduct of Facebook, Twitter, and these platforms. There is an agreement with the European Commission with these platforms. And if you see hate speech in these platforms, you can denounce this, and in 24 hours, it must be an answer, 24 hours or 48 hours. This is self-regulation. This is not a law that prohibits hate speech. This is that the platforms agrees to regulate themselves with a system of denouncing. Okay, what I'm telling is that hate speech exists. Hate speech exists in the networks, on the net, and it's difficult to fight against it. but we have some tools. We have some tools. One of the tools is self-regulation. Another is law, but law is a weak tool to go against hate speech, I'm afraid. Okay, the questions of Guillermo. Complicated questions. Okay, the first question is if hate speech could be a form of recognition or a consequence of recognition. Okay. Hate speech is a lack of recognition for one group. What I am thinking is implied in your question is that another group, as a form of recognition, is the hate speech of another group. The question of identity or alterity. We are this group, we are us, and this us hate the others. That's well, it's a simple image, but I think we can understand. Okay. This means that recognition includes xenophobia and racism. And I think, I'm afraid, Honeck, okay, I read Honeck, but I don't read all the works of Honeck, but I think Honeck cannot admit this. In the sense that recognition is expressing own identity in a positive way, but this not includes hate the other. I think this is not includes hate the other. The idea is a lack of recognition is hate speech, but recognition doesn't include hate. This is my current reading of Honeck at this point. And finally, the second question. Well, I know Guillermo some years ago, and his background. And I think this question is about, we go again about Marx. Marx is coming again. Okay, I am going to answer in Marxist terms. Okay, redistribution. You say, why redistribution is not first and then recognition? Because redistribution implies a superstructure according to redistribution. A Marxist superstructure according to redistribution. And who denounce the lack of recognition, who denounce the stereotypes, the prejudice, who denounce this, is not the proletariat vanguard, it's the struggle of recognition of the minority members. Because we are in the 20th century and we are talking about gender, identity, disability, race, ethnicity, this type of identities. And this is the terms of Honeck. And second point, redistribution and recognition. For Fraser, redistribution and recognition are co-originals and primary. This means that you cannot explain economic injustice in terms of cultural injustice, and you cannot explain cultural injustice in terms of economic injustice. That's the idea. There are something specific in cultural injustice that is different than economic. It's different, and at the contrary. Okay, I think, I don't know if I answer, but I think it's...
Yeah, and I would say redistribution can be an instrument, and I would say an instrument, a way to cultural recognition. I would say the economic, it's a kind of a way. When you emancipate and you give access to rights, then this group who has access to these rights, it can maybe receive more recognition, more respect. Do you think this is a good way of not? Because, but there are also some other kind of groups that they already have access to some rights, but they still suffer some kind of prejudice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's possible. Is different possibilities are is a combination of different possibilities, and all. And one thing is that redistribution and recognition are in tension in the Fraser approach. Are not pacific, the relations between redistribution and recognition. Sometimes we can also in Taylor, and but usually misrecognition and maldistribution are jointly in the great in the common times in the
Yeah, sure.
in the majority of the examples. For example, the Roma community in Spain, well, in all Europe is a European minority. Roma community is a misrecognition and maldistribution, and is both. What is first? I don't know, but there are prejudice, there are stereotypes, there are no access to rights, there are discrimination, there are a lot of situations in this.
And yeah, and about the hate speech about religion, for instance, there's something interesting because when we have some religion minorities, or at least the hate speech between religious groups, and not necessarily they have different kind of access to rights, you know, not necessarily they have not necessarily they need some redistribution policies, you know, but this hate speech is still there. I don't know if I understand myself. They I don't know if they are a minority, you know, this that we can deal with them, but they also have the hate speech. I mean, here in Europe, this is quite interesting. In Brazil also, for instance, but I can see this for instance. Yeah, that's another question I would make, or some, yeah, just thinking.
Well, yeah, hate for religious reasons. Hate for religious reasons. Yeah. Well, it's very, very interesting. Well, this is the topic of Tatiana, blasphemy. This is the topic of Tatiana, the hate,
Yeah.
The blasphemy and the religious intolerance, the question of blasphemy. Okay, well, maybe Tatiana another day can give us
This would
her
be great.
speech.
Yeah, she's missing here.
Yeah.
Really missing. Okay, so yeah, that's all. I guess we could make other sessions like this so we could have more talks because they are really amazing. Yeah. So does anybody wants to make some other comments or questions or?
No. Just thank you very much for everything, but that's the only thing I can say.
It was
Yeah.
exactly what I was trying to say. That I just want to say thank you for your patience with me. This is my first time here doing this speech, so it was challenging for me. And thank you very much for your time, for your attention.
Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
you're very welcome. That's the first of a lot of the next ones that will come. Gustavo,
Thank you.
welcome to
I hope.
academic. Yeah, that's great. Welcome. So
Thank you very
thanks a
much. It
lot.
was very nice meeting you, and good luck with the rest of your webinars. I saw there is a list, so I hope they will all be as exciting as this one was.
I
Yeah,
would
we have
just
3
make
more sessions.
I would just make a requirement, if it's possible, to have all your PowerPoint presentations for me, just to follow some references you made, just to trying to get deep in this subjects.
Yeah.
Of course, no problem.
Maybe
Yeah.
maybe in the end, like I can send an email, or in the mail we have, like to share
The
all
group.
the.
Maybe the mail or in the drive. If you can upload to the drive,
Okay.
if you cannot, we can share by mail. Yeah, we can share the presentations. Okay. Yes.
Perfect,
Yeah,
no problem.
there's some papers, but just attention, because the papers that are in the drive, they are still the draft version. Yeah, there are some of
very
the
much.
send the draft version, so we can read, we can study, we can use this to dialogue with the author of the test, but we cannot publish because all of them will be reviewed and maybe have some oh my gosh, major
Final corrections.
yeah, for the book. And after the book is published, then we can share this everywhere. But until there, yeah, just attention to this. Yeah.
I would like we would like to announce that there will be a version in paper of the book.
Huh.
And
This is really good.
you will have an exemplar of the book. We will send you a book for you.
This is really good.
And
Yeah,
it's not only an ebook, and also a book in paper. Yes. It's,
yes, it's
okay.
good.
Okay, well, yes, I am very pleased of the session, very interesting. And okay, well, see you on 29, no? 29 is the next session.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
about animal rights.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, they are. They